Hello, welcome to Business and Life Advice with Ataande Advisors. My name is Achumboro Ataande. I'm the CEO of Ataande Advisors, and I will be the one who will answer your questions. Here, you can ask anything business,
How would you recommend I develop these mini experts?
leadership,
What is the best way to be a female CEO?
self-development.
Where do you kind of like go to gain those experiences or to find your ideas?
I mean, it's something that I really pride myself in being able to kind of pace myself to do while I'm working on the business and just have other roles.
I love that we came full circle back to the educational styles. That's amazing.
You know your business best, you know your needs best. What is your first question you'd like to ask? Hello, welcome to Business and Life Advice with Ataande Advisors. Today, we're going to talk about how do you balance passion and the business model? What are the best ways to sell what you sell? And also, what's the ideal way to sell things and products when doing business in Africa? My name is Achumboro Ataande. I'm a 4-time entrepreneur, angel investor, attorney, and also adjunct professor. On Business and Life Advice with Ataande Advisors, we bring on entrepreneurs, leaders, and people interested in self-development to ask their questions. Today we have Professor Dennis Matanda, who's going to share some of his questions. I'm excited. He has his own business, Morgenthau Stirling, which operates in the US, but mostly does business in Africa. I'm excited to get into this. Thank you so much, Professor Matanda.
Achumboro, it is such a pleasure to be on this. I think using the word podcast is to minimize this. This is a mechanism to overall improve the way we as entrepreneurs engage with each other. And I think the way we as entrepreneurs also engage with our final products. And so my product is a very specific thing. It is African companies, African countries that are keen to draw global capital into the region. So from that perspective, it's a challenge and an opportunity, but I call it a labor of love. And that's one of my calls to fame. I don't think my wife really likes it, but it's a labor of love. I have to make a choice to actually continually work to change the fact that between 1983 and 2023, all 55 African countries have only drawn $47 billion. And in fact, if you go back to 2014, 2015, when it was at least at 67, 68 billion, Africa in the past 10 years has lost $10 billion of American investment. So from that perspective, my task is to bring back that $10 billion and expand this to at least $100 billion over the next 10 years.
That's beautiful. And as we dive into this, I would love for you to introduce yourself, introduce your company, and even dive in a little bit deeper into what you do.
So Morgenthau Stirling was created because Hans J. Morgenthau argued that foreign aid was never meant to generate foreign development. It was only meant to increase the influence of the person giving the foreign aid. When I came together with my partners to create Morgenthau Stirling, it was to say, guys, our focus is on foreign direct investment and drawing foreign direct investment from the United States, from North America, from all these developed countries into the 55 member states of the African Union. I am very specific about what my company does. My company focuses on promoting capital, investment. Now, sometimes we don't focus on portfolio investment because we focus on foreign direct investment. But ultimately, capital is capital because capital is the most efficient foreign development tool for African organizations. Now, I give you all these things to say that my organization is very data heavy, data-driven insights, knowledge development. When we go into a country to provide them with access or to provide them with insights, we give them everything. We give them communication strategies. We give them unique insights, like, for example, public placement roadshows. How do you do it in the United States vis-a-vis the roadshows that are done in Europe? what are the unique elements that are happening in the United States that could benefit an African country. So my company is built up on a very solid board of directors. My board is very, very qualified. They are very high level, but they are also very qualified on regional integration in Africa, regional economic development in Africa, regional economic communities. We don't really think that it helps to promote one single country. We believe in promoting the region. That's at my board level. My board level is built on those things. My staff is trade policy experts. From that perspective, our job, like I said earlier, is very driven by data insights, by knowledge, by building capacity on the continent.
Thank you. Thank you so much for sharing that. I think the only thing we're missing is your full name.
Sorry. My name is Professor Dennis Matanda, PhD. But my name is Dennis. Thank you so much for that. I always like to dive right into the heart of the matter. And that's true. I rarely introduce myself, but my name is Dennis Matanda, and I'm the Chief Executive of Morgenthau Stirling.
Thank you so much. So with that, there's so much you're doing and plan to do with helping Africa. How can we help you today? What's the first question you have?
My most important question, and I say this over, and I also say this on behalf of African entrepreneurs or entrepreneurs that work with Africa. How do you balance passion and the business model? Because to be honest, the passion often drains the business model, and you know how long these things take. So how do you balance that aspect? I have read up on some of the things that you've done, some of the advice that you've given on, it's not so bad to actually keep a 9 to 5. But I want to hear it from you on what you think.
So I'm very big on you have to chase the business model. You have to chase the business model because if there's no business model or there's not a strong business model, you cannot scale it. And if we really want to, especially African entrepreneurs, if we really want to have long lasting, large impact on the continent, our solutions must be very scalable.
Okay.
Right? Very scalable. And passion, I don't want to say passion is not scalable, but if you have the economics, the systems, and the people behind a company, which passion can bring, but business models bring that a little bit easier than passion, right? If you have that, then you're able to really impact that change you seek. So now, I guess that's the easier part of the question, right? Is answering business model is passion. How do we make that happen? One of the things I think we do too much is undervalue our services or products. We undervalue our services or products. And in line with that, I think we need to improve the way we sell ourselves, right? The way we position our companies, and also how we edit our products and services to find product market fit. So something that happens with, just to continue on about passion, something that happens with passion, we get so caught up in solving each and every problem. Sometimes we are not paying enough attention to the problems that are most profitable to solve, or the problems that we're best positioned to solve now. We don't have to solve everything right now, right? We can step into each and every problem sequentially to lead you onto the path you want to take. Right. I know that's somewhat vague, so we can
No, actually, it's not. It's not vague at all. So what you're telling me, and this is what I think I understand, the business model that you have is of absolute importance, because when you're dealing with a product like Africa, so to speak, you should be able to expand this. Now, expand this, is it in terms of breadth, in terms of height? I think that's a decision that somebody can make at a later stage, but you need to be able to scale it. The business model needs to be scalable. And related to that, I think what you're also saying is if we are going to sell our products, we need to find something that can give us the biggest bang right now for the business model, not for the passion. I think that's what I think I understood. I don't know if I was on the right track.
That you're exactly on the right track. But I don't want to say passion isn't involved. Passion, I would say, is the secret sauce slash the backstop. It's when the business model breaks down or something's going on, that is what keeps you going, right? That's what keeps you going. But too often we're using passion as the main fuel to drive the business rather than creating a business slash business model as the main driver slash fuel to really take off.
Okay. So from that perspective, if you were to almost hazard a rough guess on a business model like ours, what would you think from your understanding of some of these business aspects that I've thrown out? What would you think is an effective way to edit and sell what it is that we are selling right now?
Great question. Phenomenal question. I think the biggest thing to figure out with you is who are your buyers? Who are the prime decision makers and why do they buy these products or services? And what products or services are they going to buy in the future and have
Mhm.
the budget to spend? Because it doesn't matter how willing they are a buyer if they don't actually have the money. So those factors, tying that in and launching from there. And now, when we deal with governments and leaders, especially with governments, I won't say leaders because leaders come from all ranges, especially with governments. Sometimes their incentives don't necessarily make sense to the market, right?
Yep.
So,
Yep.
understanding what's the underlying reasons a president, a
Mhm.
director, a secretary, right, is doing something or wants something done. What's the underlying, and trying to speak to that through the channels you have to reach them, right? And that's how it becomes scalable. So much time we think with our hearts, hey, we want to do this good thing. They want to do this good thing also. That may not necessarily what drives them to really make this decision and what are the real outcomes they want out of they want from that, so we can determine, okay, does this product make sense, this product or service make sense to sell now to this type of person, right?
Mhm.
So that's how I would really try to think of it. And this is not necessarily something you want to say out loud to the
Of
market or
course. Of course.
talk about, because we all have our things, and sometimes if it's a crass reason they want to do something,
Mhm.
sometimes they just don't want other people to know. That's the internal. But as long as you figure it out and everybody else is going out, that's going to make you a market leader, in my opinion.
Absolutely. In your and this is a very important aspect. In your opinion, this just your opinion in regard to selling Africa or selling things to Africa, what in your expertise would you give us as an idea of the ideal way to sell things to Africa? Or should we say we shouldn't differentiate between Africa and the United States or Europe, in your opinion? I mean, because in my experience, it's been very different. Selling for the long term is very difficult. Selling for the short term is also very difficult. Finding that in between to the actual person is the point. So I just wondered if you have insights into Africa and the things that we could do to improve our sales force.
Yeah, that's a phenomenal question. I think you're spot on in terms of selling to Africa is different than selling other places, right? So I wouldn't try to sell in Africa as we sell in the U.S. Um, Now, regarding short term, medium term, long term, there's a phrase, right? There's a quote. It says that it's a bit crass, right? And it's the context is world changing things. It says
Mhm.
people don't change their mind; they just die, right? Um, and then you have the young people come in with different sets of beliefs, and that changes
Mhm. Mhm.
things. So why do I say this? Looking through the leadership at corporate level, at government level, at
Mhm.
whatever level, looking through leadership, what historically has driven people to make those decisions, and what is the likelihood that they will still be in power? And when I say die, it doesn't just mean like mortally, like, okay, people transition out of power. Historically, looking at what's happened over the last 20, 30 years to drive decision making, and is it better to model that, or do you think that there's going to be a big change slash transition of power, and that transition of power will have different motivations, and do you want to market to those motivations going forward? Right?
Mhm.
This is too. It's very difficult. I know this is a big task to put on you. It's very difficult in that way, but looking at that, say, okay, why do certain leaders just want to buy Mercedes and jets and whatnot? And why do certain leaders really want to build up their cities? Right? Because we do have great leaders also who have completely over changed their whole country, right, and built that up. So what do we see? Do we see the ones that are utilizing the country's resources without really building up infrastructure and systems and making the economy grow? Is that the goal that's going to happen for the next whatever 5 years, 10 years, 20 years, 100 years? Or is it a leader that has really transformed their country and now uh, it's a country of stability, it's a country of economic growth, it's a country of startups, etc. And decide who do you have to market to. And in business, I think this is something that, and I'll say it because I think, well, we're both in a tough position, right, to say certain things. But I'll say so you don't have to say something like that. I think oftentimes people think you just have to work with only good people, right, or great leaders. Sometimes our job is to help maybe somebody who's not making great choices, hopefully make the country a little bit better. So I'm not saying to just shy away from people we think that are bad leaders, or we think that are not leading their countries in the right way. Can we position ourselves in a way to hopefully improve the country, even if it's a little bit, rather than just saying, hey, we're not going to deal with that now?
You know what's interesting is I guess I was probably a little unfair because we are moving away from the business model questions, the actual advice questions, and discussing a problem that is almost impossible for the two of us to even try and solve. Which brings me to a very important question for me, which is a question on business model, passion, cash flow. Cash flows, cash flows, cash flows, because we know cash flow is king. You and I have had an informal conversation about this, and I think it's of absolute importance. I know what it means, but I just want somebody to give me that additional insights into cash flow. I have a really good CFO. I have a really good COO. I just wanted to get additional insights into cash flow.
So I think I couched my other answer One of the reasons, on top of, hey, sometimes you choose to work with somebody, not necessarily because you are passionate about it, but because you know the product works, you know you can help them, but you know we're also bringing cash flow to fund things that you're really passionate about.
Yes,
Right.
yes, yes.
And so making those decisions where it's, hey, it's not everything we're going that we love doing,
Mhm.
that we love who we're working with, but because we know we have a product or service that can fit their need, and we understand that it will help us strengthen our cash position or strengthen our strategic position to move forward. Those are some ways that I think through when making decisions about cash flow with my business. Is there anything in particular you would like to discuss regarding cash flow?
So for me, it's avenues to find. In other words, what is the best or what's a wise choice to make when you're going through those deep, dark, dreary months where there's delays in payments, and yet you need to find those resources to move to the next level. Do you sell your soul to an angel investor? Do you sell your soul to the banks? I mean, it's been this past 6 months have been very, very good for me from a very dark perspective, and just it shows you what resilience means. It shows you what business model means. I know for a fact that our business model works. You know, it works because we provide solutions. All we have to do is to be out there doing what you call editing the sale. I like that, what you say, you edit your products, edit your sales force, and you things like that. So I know the product works, I know the business model works, but what is it that you can do? Where do you go to find cash? Where do you go to find those bridge funds to move from one level to the other? If you don't want to borrow from your spouse, don't want to borrow from your family, where do you go in these United States, for example?
Thanks. So another big question. I would say it's sales. The answer is sales, but sales is everything. So you're selling angel investors, right? You're selling them on your vision when you bring them. If you're going to a lending institute, you're selling them. One of the biggest things that we don't do enough of, and it takes time to get to, is business development. So are we really maxing out on BD and sales? Right? At every at the levels in terms of large contracts, in terms of medium-sized contracts, in terms of the shorter but quicker paying contracts,
Yeah.
right? Are we truly maxing out and being proactive? Okay, we need to go after these types of contracts because we know we can accomplish this in 2 weeks to a month and then get paid out, and that'll keep us, that'll give us a
Afloat.
float,
Yeah.
right? That'll give us a float, and that's something. So that's one of the things that we do at my. There is a certain line of work that we don't love doing per se, but we've developed and we're really good at it. And we do that, and that gives us our float. So when the longer things, like I have pay cycles that 6 to 12 months that I'm
Mhm.
waiting for, right? And I would be in
Wow.
a lot of pain, and sometimes I am in a lot of pain. But because we're still maintaining those other things, and we're actively going after things that we do not love, because we know they pay very consistently and they pay well, and there's a lot of them out there, that helps keep us afloat, right? But I would say selling. So I looked at the BD. The BD is the first thing I would say. The second is even if you don't want angel investors, even if you don't want lenders, selling them are you. So if you ever need them, they're willing and waiting, right?
I see what you mean. I see what you mean. Yeah, I see what you mean. I just wanted to find out from you if you were sitting in my shoes or in my seat as a person that has expertise, that has relationships, that has built a certain reputation in this industry. How would you sell a product like ours? It is a knowledge base, it's data insights. Where would you go? There are things that we have tried. There are things that we are starting to expound upon. There are things that we are going to be focusing on over the next 6 months, which is basically our major differentiator. Selling our services online, doing social media stuff, things that we've shied away from. But in your opinion, where would you go? What would you do to sell a service like ours?
So one of the things is making more people know about you,
Mhm.
right? Know about your services, so you increase the potential demand, right? You increase the potential demand, and because you are a service business, and regardless of how big you are, there's still limits to how much you can do. Once you increase demand to a certain point, you become a scarcity, and people love buying scarce items, right? So it's hard to get that point, but that's what you're aiming for. So as you said, that marketing material, who are the people like the clients that you've already worked with that would possibly want your products or services? Going to them. We already know you work with governments and leaders. Can you start working with corporations as well to
Yeah.
help them get these direct investments and
Mhm.
taking a commission out of that, right? And
Mhm.
financing that relationship? That's something that happens here a lot in the US. And I know African startups and African companies need a lot of investment. So can you
Mhm.
bridge that gap and start offering that and getting a
Mhm.
piece of that commission, whether it's in sales or it's in
Mhm.
or it is a piece of the company if you wanted that. If you get to
Yeah.
a point where cash
Yeah.
is so strong, like, you know what, now we want it to come a little bit on the risk side of the ledger. That's something
Mhm.
I'll say as well. I would also follow that up, in my opinion, with uh, bartering services. I think sometimes we think too much about cash as, hey, we just need money in the bank, rather than we need money to do something else, right? And so, can you somehow figure a way to align yourself with somebody else who can do that thing and partner, whether short term, long term, medium term, right?
Mhm.
To get that done. Say, hey, we can do this, you can do this. Can we help you here and you can help us here? Or if you want to get more complex, can we help X party who helps Y party and Y party helps us, right?
Thucydides, the enemy of my enemy is my friend. I see what you're saying. Yeah, I see
Yeah.
what you're saying. If you were to ask me any question under the circumstances, what would it be? Because I feel like I have come to an expert and I'm asking the questions, but I think that some of the insights that you have could benefit me by at least you listening to the way I position a particular product.
Yeah, I think I would love to know what is your product in your mind, or what is your service in your mind, and who is your target customer
Okay.
or
So
customers.
I like what you asked, which is in my mind, what is my product? Interestingly, my product is communication, communicating between stakeholders on one side of the Atlantic Ocean and stakeholders on the other side of the Atlantic Ocean. In other words, there are too many mutual benefits out there, but there is a certain lack of knowledge. There's a certain information asymmetry. For example, if I come and tell American investors that there are 15 investment grade development finance institutions with very strong Anglo American corporate governance that have been approved by Standard and Poor's, by Moody's and Fitch, many people are shocked. And when I go and tell the people in Africa that, hey, nobody knows about you, they are in shock as well because they say, but we've been promoting the product. And the response is, nobody knows about you. Also, your website says X, Y, and Z. However, what we in the West see is blah, blah, blah. So in the end, I find that my primary service is communication, which is bridging that information asymmetry. Once you start on the information aspects, it helps a great deal because then the question is, I didn't realize we have people. Can you bring these people to us? Can you introduce the two of us? Can you? So our service is at various levels because on one hand, you will have somebody saying, how about you promote us to these particular markets? And on the other hand, can you provide us with access to them?
Wow. Uh, I have a follow-up question on that for you. Is it communicating? Because communicating is very broad to me, right?
Mhm.
Or is it validating and facilitating connection?
You know, validation and facilitation really come after reducing the information gap.
Mhm.
I think so. I fundamentally think it's communicating. It's almost as though you're doing sales on both sides. You're selling the Africans to the Americans and selling the Americans to the Africans, talking about the opportunities based on your knowledge. But I also hear what you're saying because you're asking, is it communication or validating? Because, of course, there's some knowledge on one side. And are you basically saying, quickly, can you facilitate? So I also like that you asked me in my head, what is the service I'm providing? In my head, the service I'm providing is a communication service, but in reality, it's validation and facilitation.
Yeah, yes, and that's what in your head, and this is where I should have said what you think it is in the head of your clients,
Okay, okay,
right? And that's where it's what do they really want to buy? Why? What would
okay.
make them want to work with you and choose you over every other company that might be in your space, right?
What do my clients want to buy? My clients want to cut ribbons. They want to open things. They are politicians. They want the glory. They want the show. They
Mhm.
want to be on stage shaking hands with people. What happens afterwards is our business. But what and I'm talking about the leadership wants the show. They want the glory. They want the power.
Yes, and
So being able to promise them that glory where you speak to somebody and you say, Mr. President, Mr. Governor, Mr. Secretary General, what do you want? They will tell you all these things, but at the heart of it, they want to cut a ribbon. They want to bring something big to the people because you are at that level. When you meet the technocrats, yeah, they say, how can we make the boss look good? So, from that perspective, that's what you're selling. You're selling the capacity to bring all these things together. And interestingly, that's what we do very well. That
Yeah.
snowball is something we do very well. What are the pieces you need to put in place to get to that big ribbon cutting ceremony?
Mhm. So I just want to, I'll circle back to, we did jump from, I think, corporate, right, with investors to politicians. So we can circle back to that later, but that's spot on. And now, how do you edit your messaging without saying it too? You don't want to say it in a crass way, and I alluded to that before, right? You don't want to say it in a crass way, but how do you edit that message to let them know this is the service? And every time they think of your company, they think of ribbon cutting, they think of legacy creation, they think of being reelected, right? Because that's what's going to make them, hey, we need this company in house. We want to hire them now, right? So that's the time in this work, right? To figure out what is the message, what is the product, what is the service that can deliver these results and get us to
Mhm.
know while
Mhm.
doing it without
Mhm.
ruffling feathers in the wrong way. Because you
Of
say
course.
something that people don't, they know they want, but they don't want to hear
Yeah, of
that's
course.
what they
Yeah.
want.
You have to be very careful. But I also like what you said, which is if we're selling communication, facilitation, validation, there's the other side of the discussion. How do we do it without necessarily turning it off or turning off people who are in the corporate sector, corporate companies? Can we pivot away from leaders? Can we talk to um, corporate companies, corporate American companies that want to impact? What I also know is that for the kind of things that we go for, like for example, you go for the corporate social responsibility budget, you go for the alternative investment committee, because Africa, I have to say, is a labor of love. It's very difficult to find people that are gung ho about Africa. It's very difficult because there are other people who've been doing this for a long time that have failed to do this. So all we have is a fundamental belief and a knowledge that Africa has exactly what the Americans need to invest. They have corporate governance, they have regulatory frameworks, they have institutional strengths that are micro determinants to foreign direct investment. So we know that. And it's just the difficulty of bringing it up in an industry where almost everybody is using the macro, talking about Africa's natural resources, talking about Africa's potential. Those are macro determinants. Yet Africa already has the microeconomic determinants of foreign direct investment, which are always more important now than the development and natural resources discussions. Again, that's my challenge. Being subject matter experts, you have to find ways of editing the message. So the message can be edited. The message is editable. The message can be packaged for the corporate companies, but we have to decide how easy is it going to be to get that first corporate customer who wants something from Africa.
And so now we talked about how you message the leadership in Africa. I don't think we talked about how you edit the message. So we talked, they might want validation, they may want connection. That's what is the way that you think, what you think corporations want when looking at investment. Forget Africa, because if we just focus on Africa, we're only going to get people to who are already thinking about Africa. And I think your goal is to expand not just people who
Mm-hmm.
are thinking about
Mm-hmm.
Africa, but
Mm-hmm.
people who
Mm-hmm.
haven't considered it. What do you think they want from an investment decision, from a decision whether to expand operations, etc.? What do you think they want to know, or the end goal that will get them to make that decision?
Interestingly, the most important non-financial determinant is whether they can trust the people they are going to be working with. In other words, if we're going to go into a country, are we going to have a greenfield project or is this a brownfield? And if it's a brownfield, can we trust that the management team on the ground is able to work with us to achieve our objectives? Are they going to be corrupt? Are they going to ask us for bribes? Are they going to be reputational killers? Are they going to have the sort of regulatory strengths that ensure that we're not going to be embarrassed by our public, if we're a publicly traded organization? Are we going to be embarrassed? Which brings me to the very next thing. What else do they want? Profit maximization is of absolute importance, whether we like it or not. Profit maximization. Yes, they are going to give grants and things like that, but ultimately it's profit maximization. And then the third and most important aspect, are we going to do this for the short term or for the long term? If you meet people that fit all three of those aspects, it helps a great deal.
So I'm going to focus in on number two because I think number two is the thing that'll drive the most people to Africa, right? Profit maximization. So is this a better investment than something we can make in any other part of the world?
No.
Right?
No.
Right? So we have to change that. So if we don't change, it's going to be an uphill battle till that changes. I think a good model, and you probably looked into this already, but looking at countries that have really succeeded from coming from similar cases as Africa. So I think one of the easiest things to select is China, right? How did China become in the 21st century a massive receiver of US and European capital, right? How come everybody wanted to do business in China? What was their playbook? How did that work? Can that be replicated in some countries in Africa, right? Because the interesting thing, once we convince companies that Africa is the best place for them to invest, then the leverage changes from the companies wanting to invest to the actual country, right? Because now, how many restrictions did China put on companies coming in to invest there? Because now they have the power versus when you're in a begging state. So I think that's some of the things to think through, right? That's a tall task, but comes back into, and sorry, my team's they tell me I try to connect too many dots at the same time. So I'm going to apologize to them on the front end. But this connects back to what I said about business model versus passion. Why? Because you have to sequence this right.
Yep.
So if this is too much to do now, are you doing it because it makes the most sense in the business model sense, or are you doing it because you're passionate about it, right?
So let me just try and explain it from a very simple perspective. First, China doesn't get much American investment. China doesn't get as much American investment as Singapore, which is a very small country. China doesn't get as much investment, as an example, as Ireland, as the Netherlands, or the United Kingdom, all these things here. So I'm not so sure that Africa should emulate China. I think what Africa needs to emulate is a country like Singapore.
Okay.
Why? And we have to remember that Africa is not a country. I also need to remember that I mention Africa intentionally because the 55 member states of the African Union are a better sell than saying Uganda, which is my home country, or the Seychelles, or Ghana, or Nigeria. You are much better off talking about Africa as a whole, because if you go back to 1945, after the end of the Second World War, and American investments going into Europe, and going to 1953 when the European Union's original entities began, American investment thrives in going into a country or a region and expanding from there. So from that perspective, regional integration is one of the most efficient ways to promote foreign direct investment. Now, let me answer your question. I don't know if it's about passion or business model, because it doesn't matter how passionate I am about selling investment. It's not going to be easy if I just use one country. It's much better to actually use the continent. But of course, there are many ways to skin this cat. There are very many ways to go about it. I'm just struggling with what's an efficient business model, an efficient passion model, because ultimately, it doesn't matter what you do. Africans have been trying to sell their individual countries over the past few years. But go and look at a country like Kenya. Well, Tanzania, which doesn't seem to have much American investment, has three times as much American investment as Kenya does. Kenya is at $355 million. Tanzania is at $1.7 billion. From that perspective, it's important for us to think, do we talk about the region or the country?
Mm-hmm.
So again, okay, and that's it for the moment.
Thank you so much for that correction. And like me, I agree with you that it is tough to sell one country. I think you face the same problem if you're trying to sell all 55. So possibly looking at regional groups, as you mentioned, and trying to block together maybe 3 to 10 companies. I was going to say 3 to 5, but you would know what is a better. Because unfortunately, Africa is not very well integrated, right? Legally, economically, etc. So it's hard to sell a block if the block doesn't operate like an actual block.
Like a block,
right?
yes.
There's not economies necessarily of scale within these countries, because you still have to deal with import, export, etc.
Absolutely.
So what is the best block over the next 5 to 20 years to sell, and diving into that? And hopefully that, as everything is, you know some of the work you're doing, and you can expand on that. As everything else is improving and countries are becoming more integrated, that can act as a model for expanding into the rest of Africa.
That actually is true. What's interesting about Africa is there are some really efficient blocks right now. ECOWAS, which used to have 15 member states, might have lost a few because of them being kicked out because of coups. ECOWAS is basically 15 member states: Mali, Niger, Benin, Nigeria, Ghana, Cote d'Ivoire, Sierra Leone, Senegal. Then there's COMESA. COMESA has 21 member states, including Tunisia, Libya, Egypt, all the way down to Swaziland. I break this up to say that when you look at efficient regional economic communities, you can look at COMESA as more efficient than ECOWAS, and yet ECOWAS actually charges a 1% levy on trade between the countries, which means they have a better or a more functional business model. Also, COMESA might be very, very big, 21 countries, but it's only a free trade area compared to ECOWAS, which is coming towards a customs union. Now, I'm throwing out all these technical terms to say the thing that I have found as very important. COMESA is a more efficient place to sell because it has some of the most advanced regional economic communities and their development finance institutions. For example, almost all COMESA's development finance institutions are investment grade. One is actually A rated by S&P and Moody's. From that perspective, these are some of the most important things. COMESA has a competition commission. COMESA has a very, very strong commercial court that ruled against Mauritius, one of its members. A member opened up a case against Mauritius in the COMESA Court of Justice, and they won. I'm just giving you examples of some of the institutional frameworks that ECOWAS does not have. The East African community has expanded to 7 member states, but it's not as big as COMESA. In fact, many of the COMESA institutions support the East African community because it's a customs union and it's doing very well. I bring this up to say the sales job for the region is actually better sold at regional level. But there's a new complication, a new development called the African Continental Free Trade Area, which is the world's largest free trade area. And it has been signed by 54 of Africa's 55 countries. The only country that hasn't signed it is Eritrea. What I'm trying to say is, as a passion project, their business models vis-a-vis the business model of selling Africa as regions, regional development, regional economic development, development finance institutions, and of course the 1 point something billion people, then the GDP of the region. I mean, there are very many ways we could sell this to potential investors, and I guess what I'm looking for as well is for people that want to pick different things. There's a huge place to edit. And I just want to stop there because I could go on and on and on with all these new developments.
Okay. I'm going to do a little, I don't want to say rapid fire, but a little bit of quicker because there's two things I want to get to so we get to executing, right?
Yeah.
Executions as well. We talked, the last thing you said, we're talking about corporations or wealth funds essentially pouring in money, right?
Mhm.
So if we're looking at that, and part of your what you found that you want to do is that communication, right? That communication, that fixing that information asymmetry to lead to more investments. One of the best ways, you're saying these big blocks are forming, or this big block has formed, but there's still issues with it, and you know some of the smaller, more established blocks and which works better, and even within that, there's blocks within those which function
Yes.
best. I think that you should look at that as an opportunity to showcase, hey, I know you see Africa as this big block. Here is where you'll get the best return on your investment. Right? This will
Absolutely.
cut down time, and whether on the speaking circuit, whether that's through your marketing channel, whether that's through your sales channel, saying, look, this is the data on this. You have all this, but this is really what you should be looking at. Right. And I think that is something that they may want to buy.
Absolutely. Thank you.
All right. So that's one. If you have a response to that, feel free before I jump
No,
into.
no. You're right there. Mm-hmm.
Okay. So the next thing, I'm going to start off with a question. What is ribbon cutting? I'm jumping to leaders or government officials. What is ribbon cutting? Just in a general sense to you. What does that? What is that?
Starting off a project, a building, a business, a small scale women's group that has gotten funding from the United States, or a small group that has been invested into. Somebody has taken shares, taken 51% of the firm. That's a ribbon cutting.
Thank you for walking through that with me. Now my follow-up to that is, what's the most important ribbons to be cut?
I think that there are more important ribbons to be cut at the regional economic development finance institution stage. I think that the development finance institutions, the Trade and Development Bank, the Afrexim Bank, because they have the investment grade rating, if you get somebody who takes equity in an African institution and says, I am going to be a shareholder in the Trade and Development Bank, I want to take 5% of this bank, and I'm going to put $100 million on the table and become a shareholder. That's the biggest and most important ribbon to cut, because it benefits the country, it benefits the private sector, and most of all, it improves the credit rating of the institution.
Thank you. Now I'm going to throw a couple monkey wrenches in here, but what's the most important ribbon to cut to them, to the people in power and the people with the funds to pay for your services?
There are two important ribbons. If a very big American company came and said, we want to become a shareholder in an institution where the African governments are also shareholders, they'll be happy. What's interesting is the African Development Bank has shareholding from all the Americans. The Americans are second largest shareholder. So the African Development Bank should not necessarily be part of this because it's a World Bank entity. it is these smaller development finance institutions that would have the biggest benefit here. Because let's not forget that they don't have the AAA rating that the African Development Bank has. The African Development Bank is able to borrow very cheaply because it has an AAA rating, but that's also based on its shareholders. If your shareholders are Ireland, the United States, China, Great Britain, that's going to improve your credit rating. What needs to happen is these development finance institutions in Africa need the same thing. They need the very same kind of ownership, whereby an ECA like Exim Bank decides to take not just debt equity, they just take actual equity in a development finance institution and say, we are shareholders, we will come to board meetings, we will come to AGMs, and we will actually be part of management.
Okay. So that's number one. I'm sure there's 5, 10 more things you can list.
Yes,
right?
yes.
And I would say doing that in order of importance, doing those things that and that they would pay for, and then figuring out where does Morgenthau Sterling, what can you do within that, and go after that, right? Go after those ribbons and help them cut those, right? Because that's where your market is, right? So that's how I would say to execute from this, going there, figuring out, okay, these are the things. Let's get really good at creating the scenarios to be able to cut these ribbons. And then secondly, if to really expand is the ribbon cutting, part of it is the project being launched. Part of it is the cutting. But another part is the amplification that a ribbon was cut, right?
Oh,
As they say,
yeah.
right? If a tree falls in the forest and nobody hears it, was there a sound, right? So can you do those to create those components for the cutting of the ribbon and also amplify that? And I think that's a huge market for you.
Yeah. I hear you on that. And the communication part, like I always say, is huge. And it's something that I at the beginning, when you were talking about things that we keep running away from the execution of communication strategy on these successes, but it's of absolute importance and we need to do that.
Yeah, it speaks for itself. It speaks for itself. Now, I know I took a lot of, we've taken some good time, but is there anything else, like, I'm not pushing you out. Is there anything else that you would like to tackle or discuss?
What you have done is you've given me 3 very, very important things. Selling to people like venture capitalists, keeping the conversations going, in my opinion, is something that I have been keeping away from. You don't have to get money from people right now. Just keep the conversations going. The second part is editing your sales job. Editing. And lastly, talking about the ribbon cutting. I think it's very important for us to remember that the ribbon cutting ceremony is what both the corporate companies and the governments want. It is the one thing that both public and private entities want, because they both have stakeholders that want to see some sort of success.
Oh, thank you. I'm glad that was very helpful to you. And I'm more so excited to see what you do with it and what you do with the other ideas and strategies that you have, and the growth of regions of Africa and then the whole actual continent. I look forward to seeing it, as you said, like Singapore. In 2000, if we looked at the landscape of Singapore, it is nothing. I don't even think Marina Bay Sands was up at that time, right? And now they have the gardens and so much. I actually just flew out of Singapore.
Yes,
I think
yes.
40 hours ago. So this is a great way for you, I think, to really model that and communicate that. The last thing I would also leave you with is, don't think of your communication department that you have to develop just for the outside, meaning just to amplify other people's messages. That communication department, you also scale into amplifying your messages to the VCs, right? So you build that institutional capacity, which locks in something that you realize is a key growth sector for you, but also it reduces your costs in a way, because now you don't have to look at an outside firm. You can still look at an outside firm, but you don't have to look at an outside firm as much to promote some of your core messaging.
I hear you, sir. Thank you.
You're welcome. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, and thank you for the time, and thank you for trusting us to share your questions with us.
I know that after watching all your other episodes, I think for me it's obvious that having these kinds of conversations not only benefit us, but benefits people like us. It just helps a great deal. I also like the fact that you always bring a problem to the table. A problem shared is a problem halved. Some of the aspects, some of the insights just sort of take away this dark cloud that I've been having over my eyes with my team. So this is great. So I thank you so much for this.
It's my pleasure. It's my pleasure. So at this point, thank you so much for being part of the episode. This is Business and Life with Ataande Advisors. Please hit the subscribe and share button. And if you have any resources or any connections that you would love to share with Dr. Dennis, please feel free to leave that in a comment or reach out to them. Is there a contact or website they should?
Yes.
Mhm.
Morgenthausterling.com. And if you can just email dmatanda@morgenthausterling.com or info@morgenthausterling.com, my assistant will be more than happy to send me these great emails that come in saying, oh, we saw you on this episode and we would like to get in touch. So that would be fantastic. Lastly, I like to focus on the fact that I'm also a professor. I teach American politics and international business. So it's Matanda at cua.edu, Catholic University in Washington, D.C.
Thank you. Thank you so much.